Dad favored my sister but was rejected. I chose my brother to walk me down the aisle and witnessed karma hit him hard. Dad wanted to take my sister down the aisle first, but she chose our stepdad, so he declined to walk me down the aisle. Now Dad is crying and pleading with me to let him. Although I've never been a particularly vindictive person, I do enjoy it when karma is presented in a palpable manner, something that's happened here. I don't care if that makes me a bad person or a lousy daughter. I couldn't be happier or more arrogant about the whole thing. After years and years of pain and emotional abuse, I am overjoyed to have finally seen justice. My father has made me feel awful as I've grown up. He suddenly remembers this daughter of his that he never really liked in the first place, now that he has no one else to rely on. Out of my three siblings, I 31, am the middle one. Sarah, 29, is my younger sister, and Finley Finn, 37, is my older brother. We were a happy family for the majority of my upbringing. At least my mom, 59, did her best to be an equal parent. Even though my parents had their preferences, my father, 65, was not in the same boat. Favoritism was clearly visible in his actions. His favorite person was Sarah, and since Finn was the son, he naturally felt a connection with him. They could bond over manly things. I was, of course, left out of this dynamic. It began at a very young age. I've always had the impression that my father didn't think highly of me. I made a few attempts to express it, maybe by throwing fits because I was a challenging kid overall, but nothing I ever did got his attention. As I grew older, I came to terms with it. I believe Mom tried to make up for his partiality after noticing it, because I would have remained invisible my entire life. I have always adored her for seeing me. Mom did her best to be an equitable parent, but as I mentioned, she was not flawless. She treated us the same and loved us equally. I believe Finn noticed that she made an effort to keep me from feeling excluded. He attempted to fill in after noticing my neglect and my tendency to be distant. When Finn was learning how to change automobile tires, he would ask Dad if I could come along. When Dad taught him how to drive, Dad didn't involve me in the chats, so I know it was him. I didn't experience abuse or anything similar. We received similar gifts if they gave them to us. For example, I received as many new outfits as either Sarah or Finn. However, Dad never provided me with any emotional support. Mom and Finn attempted to fill that void in my life for all that time. Sarah, on the other hand, simply enjoyed playing the role of the young princess. She was a snobby child, and her attitude caused her school to raise various concerns. In some way, all of those worries were ignored. She developed into a very demanding and conceited young lady. I am not really close to her as a result. I'm really close to Finn, and he simply can't bear Sarah. Dad is the only one who does not find her behavior problematic. Mom barely puts up with her either. This is the current situation. Mom and Dad split about a decade ago. We have all been kept in the dark about the true reason for the friendly breakup. We all know that Mom and Dad's claim that they are no longer compatible is untrue. Something else is the true cause, since neither of them began dating someone new for a long period after the divorce. I am very sure it wasn't infidelity. We still don't know the truth, and Mom and Dad have always wanted to keep it that way. There was no custody issue to deal with because we were all adults at the time. Since then, they've generally gotten along well, since, let's face it, there's no love lost there. I have personally opted to avoid seeing Dad as much as possible. I suppose it works for both of us because he hasn't voiced any complaints about my absence. When I have free time, I usually visit Mom's house, although Finn and Sarah split their time equally between the two locations. We never go with Sarah unless it's for Christmas, but Finn and I occasionally plan our trips to Mom's house. Finn simply cannot tolerate her. When viewed from the outside, we appear to be a rather normal and functional family, but for once I am glad that things have taken a turn for the worse. Mom began dating Arthur 65 years ago. They clicked right away after meeting at a yoga retreat. My time with Arthur is enjoyable, and he is a cool guy. He never tries to push limits and is kind to Finn and myself. Since nobody has ever mentioned it, and I don't see any justification for him to treat Sarah badly, I'm going to presume that everything is well between them. All that matters is that Mom is happy. Even though Dad is very combative with Arthur, they have a friendly relationship. I believe it's because Dad doesn't have a steady partner and his dating life hasn't been very successful. In addition, Mom's life is opulent in comparison to her life with Dad, and Arthur makes a lot more money than Dad does. We are all pleased for Mom, but I believe Dad is really resentful of the whole thing. The fact that we get along well with Arthur is another thing he dislikes. Dad still acts envious despite Finn's attempts to explain that none of us are taking his place and that we are simply acting like responsible adults in this scenario. All of it is very offensive and childish. Fortunately, since I don't see Dad very often, I don't have to deal with a lot of it. The dynamics of the family are as follows at the moment. Understanding the backdrop is crucial to comprehending the events of the past few days. My fiancé Kieran, 34, proposed to me a few months ago. We've spent a lot of time together. I prefer to stay private, so I didn't make the engagement public right away. After choosing the date, Kieran and I informed our families. 1 week from now, the wedding is planned. My family's response when I told them was conflicted. Arthur was pleased and Finn and Mom were ecstatic. Sarah appeared pretty unhappy, but Dad's response was fairly neutral. All of this took place during a video call, and I could see that she quickly ended the call after forcing a grin. She detests not being the center of attention, so I was expecting some sort of tantrum, but at that moment I couldn't stand her theatrics. I informed Finn that I wanted him to be the one to escort me down the aisle, not Dad, and I called him separately to gossip. He remained silent for a time and claimed that although he was deeply moved by my request, he believed it was improper to fulfill and that Dad would make a big deal out of it. He claimed that although he would really like to, he was unable to do so since he didn't want to annoy his father. He said something that hurt me. He understood that I needed him to be there with me, since he had been my male protector far more than Dad, and I informed him that I had come to him because I had been let down by Dad on multiple occasions. I hate to say it, but I also felt Finn was making sense, so I didn't argue with him about it. It was an emotional conversation. Gently, he assured me that it didn't matter if he escorted me down the aisle. It was crucial that my day be as uneventful as possible so that I could look back on it with joy and no resentment. If he were to assume Dad's position, he claimed Dad would remain agitated during the ceremony and spoil the day and the memories for me. He was correct. I knew what Finn said would make my day simpler, if not perfect, and Dad was more than capable of pulling off such a role. Finn advised me to discuss it with Dad. I stated I would give it some thought and that I was hesitant to have him escort me down the aisle. Fortunately, Sarah and her boyfriend Zach announced their engagement 2 weeks later. After exchanging glances with Kieran, I knew she would try to steal the show at my wedding or do something else, but I couldn't help myself. Finn was also not very pleased. We were both aware of the timing, but we were unable to change it, so we kept quiet. One positive outcome of this is that Sarah's wedding is scheduled for approximately 5 weeks from now, 1 month after mine. The stars didn't align in her favor, so she had to be content to be the second bride in the family. Even though she had really wanted to marry before me, I resisted her attempts to guilt me into delaying my wedding, even though she was rather sour about it. She needed to grow up since I wasn't the type to give in to her whims. Thus, things remained unchanged. But it seems that Dad and Sarah agreed that he would accompany her down the aisle before he did the same for me. I'm not really sure how they came up with something that strange. Since I'd never had much luck with boys in school, or college. I suppose they figured I wouldn't get married or would get married later. In any case, once Sarah announced her engagement, I requested Dad to accompany me down the aisle. He sadly informed me that he had promised his baby that he would accompany her first years ago while she was on her deathbed, which never materialized. He said he had made that commitment and now he wouldn't be able to lead me down the aisle because he couldn't break his word and break her heart. To be honest, I was thrilled because I didn't want him to accompany me down the aisle in the first place. I was dancing within as I feigned sadness and hurt. I assured him that even if it hurt, I would accept his vow to Sarah because I respected it. I called Finn right away and informed him of the situation. He was upset with his father. Finn stated that he would have seized the chance to accompany me down the aisle immediately if he had known Dad would act in this manner. He said that I could choose whatever daughter I wanted to grant this privilege to if Dad could. I was too delighted to care if Finn was upset with Dad. In the end it had turned out to be just what I had desired, and I am overjoyed. Despite the pressure of wedding planning, everything was going smoothly up until yesterday when unheard of drama entered my life, drama for which I lacked the stamina. Everything looked to be in order, but the phone call I received yesterday nearly caused me to lose it. It was Dad crying, asking if I would let him walk me down the aisle since he had decided not to walk Sarah down it after all. He begged me to take him back. I've never heard him speak so gently in my life. I was so close to a breakdown, but the joy was overwhelming, and I ended the conversation, telling him I had no interest in this situation. I informed him that the time had passed and that he had burned his bridges. He attempted to express regret, but I wasn't hearing it. At the time, I had no idea how to express my emotions. Nevertheless, I've since concluded that I made the right decision. Finn and I agreed that karma works in amazing ways. Despite the agony of this situation, I realize that the hurt has gone away for good. After the conversation with Dad, I was a mix of emotions. Part of me felt an odd sense of vindication, but another part of me wanted to cry just for the sheer absurdity of it all. I could almost hear the desperation in his voice, the pain lacing his words as he begged for forgiveness, for a chance to make it right. But I didn't feel pity for him, not really. I wasn't about to let him back into my life with a snap of his fingers, not after all the years of neglect, of emotional distance. The years of watching him dote on Sarah while I was left in the shadows. It felt like a lifetime ago when I first realized I wasn't the favorite. When I was little, I'd watch my sister bat her lashes, smile that practiced smile, and get everything she wanted from Dad. The trips to the amusement park, the extra special gifts for Christmas, the nights he'd sit up late watching movies with her. Meanwhile, I'd be left to entertain myself. Did never once asked me how my day went, never sat me down to talk about anything unless it was to criticize. I wasn't perfect, none of us were, but I wanted to believe that I had done enough to earn a little bit of his attention, his affection. Instead, he dismissed me. Sarah's needs were always more important. He would always tell me that I was too independent, that I didn't need him, but I wanted him. I just didn't know how to express it, not in a way that made him notice. Now, at the age of 31, I wasn't the same girl anymore. I'd grown up, had my own life. I didn't need validation from my father to know my worth. But when he cried on the phone asking for a second chance to walk me down the aisle, it triggered something deep in me. Was I being cruel? Should I have let him walk me down the aisle, to let bygones be bygones? I thought about it for a long time, but every time I did, I came back to the same answer: no. He had his chances. He chose Sarah over and over again. I wasn't going to be the one to throw him a lifeline when he hadn't been there for me when it counted. The wedding day was just around the corner, and as the days passed, I found myself growing more and more excited, more and more at peace with my decision. I didn't need Dad at my wedding. I had Kieran, my fiancé, my future. Finn was going to be there, standing by my side like he always had, and that was enough. It always had been. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that, in many ways, Finn had been the father I never had. He'd taught me how to drive when I was old enough, spent hours with me talking about life, even though he had his own family now with his wife and two young children. Finn had never once turned his back on me. He was a constant, a rock in my life. I knew that the day would be about joy, about love, and it would not be tainted by past hurt. But as the wedding approached, the phone calls didn't stop. Dad kept calling, leaving messages full of desperation, pleading for me to reconsider. But I refused to listen. I couldn't let him back in now, not after everything. The morning of the wedding I woke up with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in ages. I was ready. I had chosen my dress carefully, one that made me feel beautiful and confident, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because it was my day. The hairdresser arrived early, and I felt the excitement build as she styled my hair. My bridesmaids, including Mom, kept me company, filling the room with laughter and excitement. I could feel the love around me, and it was overwhelming. It was hard to imagine that just a few months ago I had been so unsure about how to handle everything. But now I felt grounded. I had my people, and they had me. Then the phone call came again. I saw Dad's name flashing across the screen. I hesitated for a moment. I let it ring out. As I did, Finn appeared in the doorway, smiling like he always did. He could tell something was bothering me. I could see it in the way his eyes softened as he looked at me. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice low and kind, always knowing when I was about to break. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just Dad. He's still calling." Finn's face hardened, and I knew he was upset. "I hate that he's doing this to you, but you're doing the right thing. Don't let him ruin your day, okay?" I nodded, grateful for his words, even if I didn't need them. The fact that Finn had been in my corner since day one, no questions asked, was more than enough to keep me steady. The ceremony went smoothly, just as I had hoped. The church was beautiful, the flowers perfect, and Kieran was standing at the altar, looking every bit the handsome man I had fallen in love with. As I walked down the aisle with Finn by my side, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was it. This was where I belonged. Kieran's face lit up when he saw me, and it made everything worthwhile. The vows, the laughter, the joy of knowing we were about to start a life together, it was everything I had dreamed of and more. When I looked out into the audience, I saw Mom, Arthur, and Finn, all there, all present and full of love. Sarah had shown up too, but she barely looked in my direction. I was fine with that. Her presence didn't bother me anymore. She wasn't the one who had supported me when I needed it. The reception was a blur of dancing, speeches, and happiness. Finn gave a speech that had everyone in tears, talking about how proud he was of me and how much I had grown. It was a moment I'd cherish forever because it was real. It was authentic. Unlike the cold, unspoken expectations I had always received from Dad, he wasn't just my brother. He was my protector, my ally, the person who had helped shape me into the woman I was today. And then, as the night wore on and the music played, I found myself in a quiet moment, standing by the windows, looking out at the dark sky, just taking it all in. I thought of Dad, still calling, still pleading. But I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel anything but a quiet sense of relief. He had his chance. He had his moment, and he had chosen to squander it. The past was behind me, and the future, the one I was building with Kieran, was all that mattered now. The rest of the evening was filled with laughter, with dancing, and with love, the way it should have always been. The next day, as Finn and I helped clean up, I couldn't help but smile. "You were right," I said. "Karma really did work its magic." Finn laughed, throwing an arm around my shoulders. "It always does, but in the end you made your own happiness. That's what matters." And as I looked at my brother, the man who had been there for me through thick and thin, I knew he was right. I had my happiness, and that at the end of the day was all I ever needed. The days after the wedding were a blur of happiness and calm, a new chapter in my life that I hadn't even realized I was ready for. Kieran and I settled into our new life together, finding our rhythm as husband and wife. We spent our weekends exploring the little corners of the city, trying out new restaurants, and just enjoying the quiet joy of being in each other's company. We laughed more than we ever had before, and I found peace in knowing that I had made the right decision, not just about the wedding, but about my relationship with my dad. The phone calls stopped after the wedding. There were no more desperate messages from Dad, no more pleading. Part of me felt a strange, almost guilty relief. I had given him so many chances before, but the finality of cutting him out of my life, of no longer waiting for him to choose me. A month after the wedding, I received a letter. It wasn't from Dad, but from Sarah. I had forgotten about her, honestly, until that moment. It had been years since we'd spoken, and with everything that had happened, I hadn't given her much thought. The letter was short handwritten, and unlike anything I expected. I know I've never been the best sister, and I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm sorry for the way things went between us. I don't know what you are going through, and I don't know if we'll ever be close, but I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I'm sorry, and I hope you find peace. I sat there staring at the letter, unsure of how to respond. I hadn't expected an apology, especially not from Sarah, who had always been the golden child in Dad's eyes. But there it was, a small step toward something real. I wasn't sure what the future held for us, whether this was the beginning of something new or just a fleeting moment. But as I folded the letter and put it aside, I realized something important. I didn't need anything from her. My peace wasn't dependent on anyone else's apology, especially not hers. I felt a sense of finality, like the last loose end in my heart had been tied up. I didn't need to reconcile with my past. I had moved on, I had built a future, and it was a future I was excited to continue. It wasn't long before we were back in the rhythm of everyday life, with its ups and downs, its little challenges, and its quiet victories. Kieran and I found ourselves in a new phase of our marriage, navigating the joys of shared responsibilities, of learning how to grow together, and discovering the little quirks that made our relationship special. It wasn't always easy, but I knew deep down that the struggles were part of what made the connection between us stronger. One evening, as we sat together on the couch after dinner, I realized that I had everything I needed. My past, with all its wounds, was behind me. It didn't define me anymore. It no longer had power over my future. I had let go of the anger, the resentment, and the longing for something that could never be. I was free. Do you ever think about the past? Kieran asked, breaking the silence, his voice soft as if reading my mind. I looked at him, smiling gently. Only when I realize how lucky I am to be here to have this, I said, motioning between us. I don't need to think about the past anymore. I'm happy with what we have. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to mine, his eyes filled with understanding. We are good, aren't we? Yeah, I said, feeling the truth of those words deep in my heart. We are really good. And for the first time in a long time, I knew it wasn't just the moment that was perfect. It was the life we were building piece by piece, free from the chains of the past. I had walked down that aisle without my father by my side, but with Finn there instead, and I had felt more loved and supported than I ever had. I had found my peace, my place, and my future. And it was enough. It was more than enough.